In 940 Dragon, the first Orlesian civil war in 4 centuries broke out between Empress Celene Valmont and her cousin, Grand Duke Gaspard de Chalons. The Valmont family has a golden lion, and the Chalons a black lion on their respective heraldries. Thus the conflict has been dubbed the War of the Lions. Celene and Gaspard had vied for the throne 20 years previous in 920 Dragon, as their families shed blood over who would succeed their childless uncle, Emperor Florian. Gaspard's wife, Calian, had Celene's mother assassinated via a staged hunting accident. Celene's father, Prince Renaud, tracked her down and killed her, but succumbed to the poison on Calian's blade. Celene, then only 16, had the support of her uncle's mistress, the Dowager Mantillon, who advised her to gain the sympathy of the aristocracy and maintain the secrecy of their alliance by staging an attack against her own estate with hired assassins, killing all the servants. The gambit worked, and the Council of Heralds supported her claim to the Orlesian throne after Lady Mantillon arranged the Emperor's death. Gaspard admitted defeat at the time, and did not challenge her initially in the years that followed. The Dowager Mantillon soon met her end, however. Celene's handmaiden, an elf named Briala, had survived the attack on the manor and believed the Dowager alone was responsible for the massacre that claimed the lives of her parents. Briala would prove crucial to the events that followed. Celene gave Briala her cloak, mask, and a jeweled comb to sell and urged her to flee when she discovered the elf hiding in the manor, but the elf was attacked by bandits on the road. She was rescued by an elven mage who presented himself as one of the Dalish, named Felasin. He convinced her to return to Celene and urge her to improve the lives of the elves in Orlais. He would become a mentor to her, visiting Val Royeaux regularly to exchange information and lessons over the years. Briala returned to Celene and in time became her spymaster and lover. Eventually, she took her revenge on the Dowager and assassinated her. The 20 years Empress Celene Valmont reigned over Orlais were peaceful ones. She reconciled with King Maric of Ferelden by recognizing the independence of his kingdom, which had thrown off Orlesian rule 20 years prior. Her uncle had stubbornly refused to do so. She had even been working to create an alliance of marriage through herself and Maric's son, King Cailan, shortly before his death at the Battle of Ossigar in 930 Dragon. She downplayed the martial history of Orlais in favor of promoting her empire as a capital of culture and learning. She patronized the arts and the University of Orlais lavishly. Previously, the University of Orlais had been seen as little more than a dumping ground for the younger children of lesser nobility, stifled by chantry censures. Celene built it up into one of the most respected educational institutions in Thedas, attracting nobles from many kingdoms to study nature, science, magic, and the arts, in part by announcing her intention to study there herself upon becoming empress. She also loosened chantry restrictions on theological studies and art. Noble lineage was required for admittance, but she has pressured the university to accept anyone with a noble's patronage. All the while, she has proved herself a skilled player of Orlais' grand game with Briala's help, despite the many nobles that attempted to take advantage of the young empress or overthrow her. Celene gave Briala what she wanted. She gradually worked to ease discriminatory laws against elves in Orlais, and even used her influence to pressure the University of Orlais to admit its first elven student. Her work for the elves would ultimately stir discontent and mockery among the Orlesian aristocracy, one of several factors used to fuel her opposition. Another was simply her age. By 940 Dragon, Celene was in her mid-30s and had yet to marry or produce an heir. As the likelihood of an heir by birth waned, so did the appeal of the implied possibility of a marriage alliance Celene had used to keep powerful noble families in line, and the number of those who wanted to replace her grew. Many among the soldiery, and the chevalier in particular, began to oppose the empress, in light of her apparent opposition to Orlais' military tradition. They believed that her rule was weakening Orlais, and so they rallied around Grand Duke Gaspard de Chalons. Gaspard had a powerful reputation and was very popular in the military. 20 years older than his imperial cousin, Gaspard was one of the highest-ranking nobles to ever join the ranks of the Chevalier, and had the skill to back it up, having nearly won the Grand Melee at the Grand Tourney in the Free Marches in his day, only losing having forfeited due to his broken sword and being unwilling to risk injuring his opponent with the jagged edge. Upon Celene's ascension to the throne, Navarre seized the Orlesian town of La Récolte in the fields of Ghislaine. The young empress placed her cousin in charge of the response, with orders to abandon the campaign if it cost more than 1,000 Orlesian lives. Celene's supporters would say she was showing concern for Orlesian lives, while others would say she was setting Gaspard up for failure. Regardless, Gaspard's tactical acumen allowed him to drive the Navarrans back to the town with casualties far lower than 1,000. The Navarrans fortified the town, but instead of attacking, Gaspard rode out and baited the Navarran commander into resolving control of La Récolte with a duel, which he won handily. He gained a reputation as a commander well respected by his subordinates and respectful of them in turn. Gaspard had become disillusioned with his cousin's rule in the years leading up to the Civil War, in light of her apparent inability to quell growing unrest in the Circle of Magi, and doubted her diplomatic approach could keep Orlais safe. Instead, he proposed to unite Orlais and reinvigorate its status as a great power by retaking their old province of Ferelden, ushering in a new era of Orlesian expansionism. Though he often expressed disdain for Orlais' grand game, he did not hesitate to play against Celene. Gaspard worked to inflame tensions with Ferelden and took advantage of Celene's missteps in showing disdain for the Chevalier's sense of honor, driving more to his cause. He portrayed Celene as too weak to safeguard the empire. At a hunt, Gaspard arranged for the Empress champion, Sir Michel de Chevin, to be captured by his hired bard, and himself rode off alone with Celene to discuss their differences. He made an offer of marriage to Celene, a match that would heal Orlais' divides, and perhaps their last chance to resolve the conflict before it came to open fighting. She considered it for a moment, but refused, and then Gaspard tried to kill her. Celene defended herself with a hidden dagger and an enchanted ring. Gaspard gave up the attempt as the hunting hounds drew near, but gave her an ominous proclamation. "Remember, cousin, everything that happens you could have avoided with wedding vows." Celene knew that Gaspard's support was too entrenched. If she arrested him there, it would mean civil war, so she let the incident pass in the hopes that a peaceful resolution was still possible. Fate would give Gaspard another weapon to use against Celene. In the city of halamshiral, a well-liked elven trader named Lamette was brutally killed by a minor noble's personal guard after taking the blame for a child that threw rocks at his carriage. The elven majority of the city began attacking guards and stealing goods, and then went into open revolt against the human aristocrats, calling for justice. Desiring to avoid a violent confrontation, Celene dispatched Briala to assassinate the offending lord and give the elven rebels the justice they were asking for. But for the moment, her apparent inaction in the face of revolt made her look weak, which Gaspard capitalized on, going so far as to commission a play about the life of Andraste in which her elven ally Chartan was played by a woman and portrayed as seducing the prophet down the wrong path, necessitating that Maferath kill her to save the faith. The unsubtle metaphors of the production fueled rumor of Celene's overly kind attitude toward the elves at the expense of Orlais, and some even took seriously the suggestion that Celene and her elven handmaiden were lovers. Gaspard's rumors were intended to humiliate and drive Celene to rash action, but he had no idea how close to the truth they were. When Celene saw the play, it shook her to her core. She became convinced that Gaspard and his allies knew about her and Briala, and saw her support crumbling around her unless she could make a show of strength that would erase all credibility to these rumors. So she gathered a force and marched on halamshiral. Briala succeeded in her mission to kill the offending noble with the help of her friend Valasin, but no sooner did she leave his manor than she found the elven slums in flames at the hands of Celene's forces and the elven rebels being slaughtered. This was all a trap, what Gaspard hoped to be the first and last battle of the war. He had prepared a force to attack the Empress outside halamshiral. Celene still held the loyalty of powerful nobles, and others still would balk at deposing her by force, so Gaspard hoped to end the situation decisively by removing her. His plan would only succeed if he could kill her or force a surrender with a single stroke. Her army, exhausted from a rushed march and expecting to fight only poorly armed and untrained elven peasants, was completely unprepared for the ambush of Gaspard's chevalier. Her forces were caught marching from halamshiral to the nearby Winter Palace and routed. Celene herself was knocked from her horse by a blow from a maul that partially caved in her breastplate, but her champion, Ser Michel, escorted her into the trees, hoping to make for Jader, where the loyal Lady Serral could give her shelter. Gaspard's forces blocked the road, however, and forced them to shift course back to Valroyaux in a roundabout route around Lides. Along the way, they met up with Briala and Valasin, who had escaped Gaspard. By this time, all the Empire was in a state of alarm. Lady Serral had taken to the field with her forces to fight Gaspard and was burning villages where Gaspard's soldiers were staying to discourage citizens from cooperating with them. The Marquis de Chevine rallied Celene's northern allies and secured Valroyaux in her name. Rumors spread of Celene's death or capture, or that she had made it safely to Jader. Nobles in the capital hired press gangs to force commoners into service and build up their forces. Meanwhile, Gaspard hunted for the Empress as Celene's party searched for a nearby Dalish clan, hoping to acquire their protection and safe passage in return for promising to give halamshiral to the elves. Eventually, they discovered Clan Vernon, but the elves regarded Celene's offer as an empty promise and considered that they might be better off allowing Celene and Gaspard to kill one another before attempting to take the Dales themselves. As they debated whether to kill Celene or hand her over to Gaspard, Celene's party discovered that the Dalish had summoned and imprisoned a demon called Imshale in the hopes of acquiring a keystone to the Alluvians. The Alluvians were relics of the ancient elves, enchanted mirrors that allowed one to move great distances in a short time by traveling between them. Celene saw the possibility of returning to Valroyaux immediately and using the mirrors to outmaneuver Gaspard's forces. They escaped the Dalish and found the demon, ultimately recovering the keystone, but Ser Michel unknowingly released Imshale, who proceeded to slaughter the elves. Gaspard and his ally, Duke Ramash, discovered the Dalish camp and allied with the sole survivor, Miris, first the clan's keeper, who was eager for revenge. With her help, they caught up with Celene's party, traveling through the mirrors to an ancient burial chamber, and after a brief standoff formed a truce to deal with the undead surrounding them. Gaspard and Celene agreed to resolve their differences with a duel between the Grand Duke and the Empress Champion after they reached the central chamber to activate the Alluvians across Orlais. When they reached the chamber, they encountered a Vartaral, a creature created by the ancient elves as a guard, and were forced to fight it. Duke Ramash attempted to assassinate the Empress during the fight, but was subdued and promptly executed by Gaspard for violating the truce. Gaspard and Ser Michel commenced their duel, but Briala had come to a disturbing realization. Seeing that Celene and Gaspard wore identical rings, which Gaspard had explained were given by the Lady Mantelon when he ordered a death in the Grand Game, Briala realized that Celene had first worn the ring when she found Briala among the massacred servants. She realized that Celene, the woman who had been her lover for 20 years, had ordered the attack that killed her parents at the suggestion of Lady Mantelon. The two mages with Gaspard, the noble-born apostate Lien de Montsamard and the Dalish first Miris, used magic to interfere with the duel, but Briala killed Lienne. Felacin convinced Imshale, who had been possessing Miris since Gaspard had found her, to abandon her body. Just as Ser Michel stood poised to triumph over Gaspard, Briala invoked a promise he had made to her weeks earlier to do one task for her in exchange for not revealing his falsified heritage. Bound by his sense of personal honor, Ser Michel yielded to Gaspard. Briala had decided she could not trust Celene with the fate of the elves and seized control of the Alluvian network for herself, though she allowed the humans to leave. She sent Gaspard and Michel to Valchevine, where the former set about gathering his forces to continue the war, and the latter, knowing that Celene would execute him as a traitor should he return, dedicated himself to hunting down Imshale as penance for releasing the demon. Briala sent Celene not to Val Royeaux, where her power base was strong enough to end the war decisively if she moved quickly, but to the Winter Palace in halamshiral. She would ultimately make it back to Val Royeaux, but the time it would take would lose her the advantage. Thus the war continued, with Celene and Gaspard's forces struggling in a deadlock across Orlais. To make matters more complicated, the circles of Magi went into rebellion, and their Templar jailers rejected the authority of the Chantry shortly after the war started, furthering the Empire's descent into chaos. Meanwhile, Briala began to build an underground army of elves to harass both sides, seeking to maintain the deadlock and create an opportunity for the elves to gain more rights. But as the war raged, it would become part of another conflict. The ancient magister turned blighted monstrosity called Corypheus had been released into the world some years earlier, and had set his sights on reviving the old Tevinter Imperium. As part of his plan, he wanted to invade Orlais with an army of demons. His forces added yet more chaos to the battlefields of Orlais, preparing body pits for spirits to inhabit and attack both sides in the exalted plains. He influenced deserters from both sides to help smuggle red lyrium and use them in experiments with the substance. To remove resistance to his assault, he enlisted an ally in the imperial court, Grand Duchess Florian de Chalons. The most easily forgotten member of the royal family, Florian had been in her brother's shadow since birth, named after the emperor to curry favor for Gaspard's claim to the throne. She was trained by her mother to watch and listen, but never draw attention to herself, all for Gaspard, but no longer. Florian invited Celene and Gaspard to a ball thrown in the Winter Palace for peace talks in 941 Dragon. Celene invited Briala as ambassador of the elves of Orlais, hoping to gain her support. Briala hoped to influence whoever would gain the throne to elevate an elf to the nobility. Gaspard invited the Inquisition as his guests to bolster his reputation. The new order had arisen to combat Corypheus and the magical calamity he had unleashed, and had gained striking influence across the south for their efforts, with the Inquisitor said to be the herald of the prophet Andraste herself. Gaspard smuggled mercenaries into the palace to stage an attack, though Celene had uncovered the plot and laid a trap. The Inquisition alone knew of Corypheus' plot to assassinate the Empress, and blamed Gaspard for the deed. What happened next would depend on the actions of the Inquisitor, who would survive the night and rule Orlais. One way or another, the war was ended that night and Orlais reunited, for the time being. Well, I realize the title of this video may be a bit misleading since the video was mostly about the lead-up and first battle of the war, but that's all the detail we've got. I'd also like to call myself out for a mistake I made in my Valmont video. I made it sound like the conflict between Gaspard and Celene's family only got violent after Florian's death. In rereading Masked Empire for this video, I realized that Lady Mantelon only assassinated Florian after all that played out. Well, I hope you liked the video. Leave a like and let me know how I can improve my videos. See you next time.